to moderate this first dialogue is the Chief Risk Officer of the Mahindra Group, Mr. K.N. Vaidyanathan, and I now hand over the floor to him.
Greetings and good morning. Good morning. I was told that Gateway House is following the Indian clock for dinner and the American clock for the start of the meeting. Right? So we live in one continuous world. So for some of you getting used to the American time for start of meeting, a good morning again. As Mohandas Pai pointed out, you have a chief risk officer moderating a session on innovation. I hope the irony is not lost. Mahatma Gandhi believed in HUF. Now, if you think I'm prepping up for a primetime debate on television, Mahatma Gandhi believed humanity is an undivided family. And that's the subject that we're going to talk about in the context of Asia and Asian integration. Is it possible for these countries to come together to deliver more? If you look back over the last 70, 80 years, there are some case studies of integration. You have the European Union, which came on the back of the wars and had a strong political agenda to it. You have the work in progress ASEAN economic community brought together by common fears and concerns. But to me, a great case study of integration is the integration that India went through on independence. An integration born out of freedom. You have the SARC example where everybody is waiting to see what the upside of that integration process is. So history has a number of different examples of integration. If I wear my corporate hat and somebody told me about a market with about over 4 billion people, with a GDP about a third of the world, the salivary glands would work overtime. And that's the market we are staring at. So before we get into the hows and the mechanics of integration, I want to first establish that there is a business case for integration. With me in this discussion are three strong personalities. We have Mohandas Pai, true to his name, Mohan from Krishna from Vishnu, where has multiple incarnations. And today he's the incarnation of Shiva, the three I's, an investor and an incubator in the area of innovation, the three I's. We have Syed Munir Khasru. Munir in Arabic is to brighten. So as an early morning start, I have appealed to him, Tamasoma Jyotir Gamaya, lead us from darkness unto light. And when you have two such strong personalities, I need somebody who can take it in the chin and be the courteous interface. Courteous in French is courtesy. So we have Curtis Chin, who has had several years of experience watching over Asia as the US ambassador to the Asian Development Bank. I'm going to start with Mohandas Pai. Help us establish the business case for Asian integration.
Well, let's look at data. Asia is 60% of the world's population. Asia's contribution to world GDP is 37% today and could go to 46% by 2030. Asia's contribution to world trade is 32%, could go to 51% by 2030. Intra-Asia trade has gone up from $800 billion in 2000 to $3 trillion in 2014. And the share of world trade in the future is going to go up, ICT trade is going to go up. So we are seeing good growth in Asia over the next few years. Right now, this year, the world growth could be something like 2.53%, and for the next 15 years, the whole of Asia could grow 4 to 5%, Europe 1.5 to 2%, the United States 2 to 2.5%. Asia is a very large young population, a large consuming class, and if you see the future, this is going to be the dominant economic bloc. Now, when you become the dominant economic bloc and you're faced with a variety of events that are going to unfold in the next 15 years, which I believe is going to disrupt the world, like automation, 3D printing, robotics, the rise of alternate energy, the disruption of existing supply chains which link consumers and producers around the world, and the flow of disruptive capital because of very low interest rates in many parts of the world, negative interest rates to the extent of $10 trillion in Japan and Europe. And you see this kind of a rapid change happening, change in geopolitics because of changes in the energy markets on the world. Then it is important for Asia to look to the future and look for some new models. Possibly the new model could be an Asian common market. We've seen the EU, after the Second World War, develop a common market, more so as a political union to get over all the huge wars that they had for a couple of centuries. And the World War II was so disruptive, they said no more wars. We'll only fight across the table, but no violence. And they created the market as a form of a political union. But we could have an Asian common market without a political union, without a common currency, just reduce the barriers to trade and commerce, and reduce the barriers to the movement of natural person to the extent possible, and try to ease capital controls so there could be flow of capital, especially in areas of innovative technology, in areas where new things are going to happen like alternate energy, in areas of climate change, etc., which are much easier areas. The difficult areas are a common currency, which is impossibility, we should drop that. The difficult areas are a political union, which will never happen, we should drop that. But we have models for, openness in trade. Yes, there are trade blocks. You have ASEAN plus China plus India. Then you have the Pacific blocks, the TTT, or whatever it is that is there. But we're missing out the Middle East, we're missing out Central Asia, and we're missing out the Asian part of Russia. So my firm belief is it's time to talk about an Asian common market and increase intra-Asia trade. Why intra-Asia trade? Is because of automation, there's going to be huge job losses in many parts of the world. Automation means possibly much more work and production coming back to the home countries. Today in the United States, a robot costs you $4.50 an hour to make it work, whereas a human being costs you $8, maybe $15 if the minimum wages goes up. And this increasing level of automation is going to change the way production happens. 3D printing is go localized production. So this is a scenario you have in the world because next 15 years are going to disrupt all existing economic models in a very, very substantial way. And if Asia has to develop, Asia has to give people a greater standard of living, then we need to have a market which produces results and reduces inefficiency and reduces waste. And that's why I propose to all of you the creation of an Asian common market as a trade bloc without a political union, without a currency, without all the hard stuff for which many people like Curtis will spend years negotiating and making sure that people are courteous to each other when they negotiate. And this could drive Asian trade forward.
So that's fantastic business case. It hinges on, Curtis, if I may bring you, and it hinges on the fact that we keep all the negatives out, the difficult issues out, whether it's about political, whether it's about currency, and just focus on the positives and the upsides. As someone who's seen Asia over the years, what do you think we need to watch out for if you embark on this kind of an integration model?
Well, thank you, and thanks Gateway House and Government India for really beginning what I hope is an annual event, because these discussions are so important. Earlier in our pre-briefing, we were talking about political correctness. Sometimes I find we are too politically correct, as courteous as I am, and we don't address the real issues. Sometimes when I talk on these trade panels, in my role now, my main role now is with a group called the Milken Institute. Some of you will know of Mike Milken, but it's really about focusing on capital market innovation and the things that we need to disrupt. He really disrupted Wall Street. How do we change and provide financing to tech, to startups, and things that will really drive things forward? And so often on these panels, it's all very positive. Let's all, we say kumbaya, let's all come together and be happy. But I'm also very much a realist. As a former diplomat, as a business person, I side with the foreign secretary last night who said, as a diplomat, you're an optimist. And so I'm an optimist, but I'm also very much a realist. And as we all seek to push things together, I always am reminded, whether you're in business or in government, about a Chinese saying, which is about one bed, two dreams. And so often we forge these partnerships between governments or business. We're all together, but really the two people in that bed are thinking different things when they wake up that next morning, And so at the Asian Development Bank, for example, when I sat on their board, primarily infrastructure finance and pushing for an enabling environment for business to succeed, I also saw the very real world, almost like the sign here, of where geopolitics got involved. India versus China, very much so. US and Japan, sometimes we work together, sometimes we don't. And this blocks some of the great things that I think we would all want to be pushing for. And so when I think about what we in Asia or in Asia Pacific involving the US, but even around this world, need to do, I try and always come up with something very simple for people to take to heart. So I and a Milken Institute economist put out a piece about how can Asia really drive tech and innovation forward, ideally bringing countries together. And we pointed out from our home base, really in Silicon Beach, not Silicon Valley, Silicon Beach, we pointed out three things that I always want people to think about. One is the role of education. I'm on the board of an education organization. Others here are also involved in education. But when we assess research universities that really drive future innovation, some of these third-party assessments will often put numerous California institutions at the top. It's mixed when they look at Indian institutions. India has some amazing institutions, but when they're assessed on a particular metric about fundamental research, which drives some of the things that ultimately are monetized out of Silicon Valley, Silicon Beach, India isn't quite yet there. And then we have the broader issue, of course, of intellectual property right protection. So I really want to encourage people to focus on what India or your own nation can do to improve education. The other thing we look at, and this is really from my hat at the Milken Institute, we're always looking at innovative ways to finance things. I'm always struck how China rightfully claims credit in many ways for the success of Jack Ma and Alibaba. He was, I think, on CNBC this morning. But Jack Ma, also very interesting. Jack Ma at Alibaba now has one of the biggest companies in the world by market cap. But he chose to raise the money in the United States. And so when I look at how do we get seed money to organizations, great success. I'm looking forward to my first trip to Bangalore. You're inviting me, right? But that notion of how do we drive money to organizations, to individuals, too often we're wedded to old ways. It's friends and families, or my bank doesn't give me money, what do I do? And I think we need to change that. But the third message that we looked at our data from California, which California, United States has really embraced, which are really pushing this message around Asia and the Pacific, is really a mindset issue. You in Asia, I may be American, but clearly I have an Asian face and some Asian sensibilities. Sometimes you don't want to talk about things that don't go so well. And I was talking to some entrepreneurs in Southeast Asia, and they said, one reason they don't want to go into this more entrepreneurial world, they want to work in government, is that they're worried what their parents might say or think. And I have Chinese-American parents. I don't have Indian-American parents. But I think my parents are still trying to figure out what I'm doing and why I'm not back in the corporate world. But I feel there's such opportunity in Asia if we can get people to think differently. And so what California does, what the United States does, also we embrace risk. If you look at some of the great tech stories from the United States, many of them actually are immigrants. I saw some data recently that I think of the top 30, I thought 12 of these billion-dollar companies were founded by Indian immigrants to the US. But is that embracing, my last business failed, but look at me now. And I think that's what we also want to encourage and embrace throughout these Asian countries also.
Let me bring Syed Munir Khosrow into this discussion. You come from the land which produced a well-grounded innovation model, which is the Grameen Bank. help us think through, from an Asian integration standpoint, what would be some of the key focus areas that the integration would aim at?
Thank you. First of all, thanks to Gateway House India for bringing us all together. And I think yesterday also we had a number of interesting rounds, lot of insights. And today's day begins with something very inspiring to all of us, innovation. Going back to Grameen Bank, yes, as we all know, this microcredit model, which came out of the very rural village of Bangladesh, has become a good role model as far as women's empowerment and microcredit is concerned. But I would like to push the boundaries a little bit, in the sense when we talk about Asia and the big numbers, which one of my co-panelists referred to, Asia is at a crossroad. How? Well, financially, trade-wise, we are doing very well. Numbers are staggering. China has had unprecedented 3 decades of growth, 10%. India is now leaping to the same kind of growth figures. During these times, whether you call it transition, whether you call it disruption, whether you call this change, these are times when we are challenged to our core. When I say core, I would push the audience to look into yourself. Ask yourself what you were 5 years back, 10 years back, what were you thinking, and what you're thinking now. Just take a piece of paper and write, and you'll be amazed how many perception you had even 5 years back and what you're having now is changing so dramatically. Underlying essence being our pace of change at times is not keeping pace with the pace of change of the society. So we have technology, we have capital, we have investors who are pacing up much faster than we would have thought, but then we have a society system which is not moving quick enough. I'll give you a few numbers which will help you. For example, when we talk about innovation, we look at the society. So I would like to take in a broader context and look at some of the social issues which will significantly affect how innovative Asia becomes down the road. First and foremost, I would challenge the mindset. A good example is China. China has been referred to, quoted many, many times, countlessly. But how many Chinese brands are there? Hardly. In the 100 top brands, there are only 10 Asian brands. Why I'm referring brand? Because brand comes from those products which are innovative. Give you a simple example. Say there was a power disruption. Lights went off, and we were asked to wait. Tell me what you would be doing. Anybody? Mobile. So you wouldn't lose a second to go back and starting your 2 fingers. How one person had changed our behavior pattern from the airports to the schools, to the colleges, to the business room? Steve Jobs. One single innovation has changed the way we have behaved. Coming to that brings to the question of mindset. In Asia, unfortunately, we still haven't leaped to that level where business houses particularly have started thinking more about innovation, branding, brand equity, profit, as opposed to volume and revenue, which has driven China, which also is now being said, make in India, the next manufacturing center. So in this, all this rush for making money, we are losing sight of some of the broader issues. 2 key issues I'll touch on, then I'll be more interested to hear what my fellow panelists have to say. 2 basic things. Look at education, look at health. Even today, in India, for 1,000 people, there is not even 1 doctor, less than 1 doctor, and less than 2 nurses. Compare that with US, compare that with Japan. Difference is starking. Look at China. In China, even in urban China, on an average, a parent has to pay $10,000 to the middleman to get their children admitted to a good school. And in the rural areas, parents pay half of their income. Unless these basic social infrastructure are well put in place, innovation will be a far cry. So that's why I thought, just as my panelists have very rightly so as to push the boundaries on the upward stream, I thought we should go into a downward stream and look into the ground reality. These are things which will need to be addressed down the road, and that automatically will hopefully have an influence on the society, how it looks at innovation, how it looks at brand equity, and this fundamental mindset. And Asian businesses largely are family-owned businesses. It's good, it's bad. Good is you can take decisions quickly in a family. Bad is there is this tendency to be comfortable in the own secured zone. So I would like to wrap up with this, that mindset, social infrastructure, education would be the key driving forces for Asian innovation in the decades to come. Thank you.
In the speakers lounge, we agreed that anybody wants to speak, they would shake their head vigorously. So I'm going to bring Mohan Datapai into the discussion again. You don't want common currency, you don't want political union, which is fine. Then how would business entrepreneurs drive Asian integration? What role could they play?
Viti, let's understand one thing. Intra-Asia trade is growing at a tremendous pace. Why is it growing? Because the economy is growing. If the whole of Asia grows 4 to 5% a year, it could. China is 6.7, could grow at 5. India could grow at maybe 6, 7. Southeast Asia 4 to 5. Maybe the Middle East will grow after Prince Salman does his reform. So we're going to see tremendous change. And so for the next 15 years, growth in the world is higher in Asia, maybe on a lower base, but overall, the size of GDP is very, very substantial, and compared to Europe or compared to the US. So business is going to link up with each other, things are going to happen. Two, innovation doesn't happen at the bottom of the pyramid to a great extent, all right? Innovation happens at the top. I mean, you can't accuse innovators in the United States of being from the BOP, right? So innovators are few, but innovation drives everything. To me, the biggest disruption in society is the internet. In 5 years' time, 1.25 billion people are going to be networked together through a cheap smartphone with cheap data in India. And if you look at China today, what China is today and what China was 5 years back is unbelievable change. And if you look at people in the age group of 18 to 25, what are they thinking? They're the ones who are going to be the consumers 15 years from now. You know, we get stuck with this bottom of the pyramid. For the bottom 500 million people in India, things are not going to change dramatically for the next 40 years. Okay? These are huge countries. We can't expect everything to change. If the top 500 million change, that's bigger than the population of the United States, you're going to see unbelievable change. If the top 700 million change in China, that's going to be unbelievable. India has 3 or 4 countries in one. You can't hope for everything to change. It's not going to happen. So my thesis is very simple. Intra-Asia trade is going to drive growth because the economies are going to grow. Consumption levels are going to go up and investment is going to go up in this part of the world because it's short of investment. There's enough savings in this part of the world. The Western world has surplus savings. Savings are going to come here because the negative rates cannot be done away easily. The pace of innovation is going to change dramatically, driven by connectivity, driven by the smartphone, and much, much lower cost. To give an example today, look at chips. Bangalore is the home of the world designer community for semiconductor chips. They design here, send it through the web, it goes to China, it's manufactured, smartphones are sold in India. It's an integrated economy. At the top is very well integrated. Now, there are political problems. There are mindset issues. And they're not going to change immediately. They have not changed for 100 years. They're not going to change the next 30 years. But a larger part of the population, the consuming class, is going to come. He spoke about education, right? Now, I look back 5 years for education in India and look back today, our GR is 23%, is growing at 6% a year, right? And we're seeing bigger and bigger, a larger number of people graduating. We got 8 million people graduating every year. By 2030, we'll have a GR of 50%. That is 70 million young people in college. 60% will not have jobs, okay? They're going to drive cars like Ola, Uber, and all that. That's a different issue. But, you know, there's this enormous drive. Let's capitalize on drive. Many things are going to happen. I believe 60-70% of the markets in Asia are going to get integrated by market forces. The balance 30% is for political leaders to ease the way. If they don't ease the way, you know, you could be constrained, but things are going to change.
Can I push back, though? I would say that, it sounds funny when I say this kind of thinking, but I think this kind of thinking I have seen contribute also to, in the United States, the rise of Donald Trump, the rise of Bernie Sanders, because I don't think there is enough attention paid to the not so wonderful consequences of all these great innovations. To be honest, you know, I'm really a big fan of India, but I can't tell you how many times I've come here and within the first 24 hours, I've seen someone going to the bathroom on the street. I very rarely see that. Maybe actually I see it in New York, come to think of it. But when you think about what countries are focused on, I think we need to focus also on the bottom of the pyramid. And I believe innovation can be brought to the bottom of the pyramid in a way that business will also make money. Ultimately, I'm a private sector person because I know the Asian Development Bank, the World Development Bank, the new Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, these institutions can help on the margins. But it will be the private sector that will drive job creation, and as you note, will also drive job destruction. But I don't think we pay enough attention to the negative consequences of integration or of the consequences of tech innovation spreading across borders. And I'm often struck, I spend a lot of time, the Milken Institute is based out of Singapore because of the rule of law. The rule of law is so critical when we talk about integration, and one of the challenges is there's vastly different levels of rule of law between countries. So if I'm an investor, why am I going to invest here versus there? One, maybe the market size is so big that I'm going to invest in China, regardless that the rule of law isn't as good as wonderful little Singapore, because the money I can make in one place overall will be much better. But the reality is that when we think about the great economies that we thought would drive the world just 20 years ago. Remember Jim O'Neill from Goldman Sachs kind of popularized this notion of the BRIC. Brazil, Russia, India, and China would be the ones driving global growth because the base was so low. Clearly, the growth rate will be much higher. But look at the BRIC today. Brazil, we've got a president that's no longer the president. Russia, we've seen what's happening in Russia. China is slowing and struggling with many challenges. And India, you will know India best. But in terms of having significant challenges. So when I say to people, when you look at your own country, when I come talk, people say, well, who will be that next BRIC? Will it be, Indonesia if I'm in Indonesia, or Mexico if I'm in Mexico? And because I never want to offend my host, I will say, I worry less about which country will be the next BRIC, because all of you, in a sense, can be the next BRIC. I worry about what I call now the little BRIC. The little BRIC isn't a country, it's 4 economic constraints. It's bureaucracy, it's regulation, it's interventions by government, and it's corruption. And we need to find out, appropriate to our own nation, our own culture, what is that right balance for each of this little BRIC if we're really serious about driving innovation and integration forward. Clearly we need bureaucrats. I was in government, but when is there too much government? When are they inefficient? Clearly we need regulations, but when does regulation stop me as a business person from hiring a 50th employee? The United States intervened, I think, too much in some ways when the world economy was falling apart. But when does intervention, again, come such that I'm not even going to think about that market? And let me close with my little C of corruption. There's a group out of Berlin called Transparency International, which will look at perceptions of corruption. So whether it's real or not, it's based on these surveys. Singapore, New Zealand, there's someone from New Zealand here, always does very well. Smaller markets, terrific. We can learn from them. The BRIC, pretty bad. India, at least to its great credit, is now perceived as less corrupt than China. Right or wrong, but that's the data. And so data is great, and data will help us manage things, but I also think we need to be very careful about which metrics we pick when we're shaping our foreign policies and approach to business and government. Because again, don't ignore the people at the bottom of the pyramid, because they will help change this world and companies.
I need to intervene. Here. And I recognize Manjeet will beat me up if I try to move from a moderator to a panelist. Physics tells me that if you have a stack of bricks, it's the most difficult to lift the bottommost. That should not stop me from trying to lift what is on top. If I start lifting people from the top, over time, I would get a chance to lift the bottom. I think we've lived too long a life driving, looking at the rearview mirror. And that's constraining ourselves from progress. I want to bring Mohandas Pai again. Innovation it comes from an environment of positive energies. Yes, he spoke about Trump and Sanders. Please forget about that. It comes from positive energy. How do we infuse that positive energy so that over time, the entire society is uplifted, but we don't get bogged down, oh, I'm not doing enough for bottom of the pyramid on every step of the game?
I believe that we can bring in great energy by believing in younger people and giving them primacy of thought. I would like all of you to talk to people who are 18 to 25 and see the world view. They're incredibly positive. They're incredibly optimistic. They understand the challenges. They want to rise above challenges. And in the 18 to 25 in India, 60, 70% are poor. They fought their way up. They want to do well. They got incredible energy and they see a world of great opportunities. Now we can wallow in this poverty, we can wallow in this for all time to come. You can come to India in the next 15 years, you're going to see people doing some things personally in the streets. You know, is it going to change what is happening in this country? It's not going to change what is happening in this country. Things take their own pace to change in some ways, and they're going to change. I look back 10 years and I see today. 10 years back, if you speak of what China would be today, nobody will believe you. 10 years back, if you speak what India is today, nobody will believe you. I looked at data, but in 1991, before liberalization, and 2015 March, India grew in dollar terms at 8.4% a year, every year for 25 years. 8.4%. China grew at 9.9% for 1978 till 2014. There's been growth. Has the growth been even? No. Has a set of people benefited? Yes. Is going to hurt people? Yes. Are we better off as a society than we were earlier? Definitely yes. Could we have done better? Yes. Could we have had a social net? Yes. Could we have less corruption? Yes. But they are what they are. Now we got to use what we are to be much better in future. Is the world going to be a much better place without strife and violence in future? No. The world is going to be what it is. But we can make sure more people have a better life than earlier, and that's going to happen. And when societies become open, information flows, people get empowered at the bottom of the pyramid. You know, you go to rural India today, a woman in a remote place has got a cell phone, she talks to everybody, her life is changed, she talks to her children. A minister came, Ravi Shankar Prasad came in public and said, he spoke about this woman in the remote part of one of the southern states. She was doing Skype to talk to her son and grandson in Dubai. She couldn't do that. No, she's talking to everybody, sharing information. So I think there's a lot to hope for. A lot to hope for. And things are going to accelerate. The pace of change is going to accelerate.
Munir, you want to throw more light on that?
Yes. I would strongly differ with the oversimplification of the process my colleague Pai is suggesting. And you don't have to go too far. You're talking about energy. You're talking about unleashing forces. You don't have to go too far. Look at China. How much energy, how many billionaires, millionaires came out? Why is the Chinese government so nervous now? If you keep on being hyped up and just driving on the positive forces and oversighting some of the undercurrent, negative current, which may at times upset the upstream flow, you're asking for serious trouble. China hasn't got used to the capitalist system of laborers being laid off. China hasn't got used to how to deal with factories closed. So now you have a situation where your growth is slowing down, and you have had a communist system before where every worker's job was ensured. So it's good to have energy. It's good to unleash creative forces. Nobody's disagreeing. But in Asia also, I must caution, we Asians are very emotional. We have this habit of being carried away. And then we reach some peak, then we start looking at the valleys and coming down equally fast. That has been our fundamental problem. Unless we look deep into ourselves, we are very creative people. Some of even before 100 years back, if you look at innovations, maths, physics, it came from Asians. Where are we today? Where other nations have gone. We have to look carefully to history. Look at Germany, one of my favorite examples. Germany was pulverized. What happened in next 10 years? 50s to 60s? Three simple innovative companies, Siemens, Volkswagen, Thyssen. They drove Germany from bankruptcy to the lead of nation again. Why I said in my initial remarks, the mindset issue, we have this tendency, and no disrespect, I respect his energy and creativity, and he's a great incubator, innovator. But the problem is, in our rush, we overlook these fundamental forces, which down the road has an impact. So I would disagree. It would be rather very unwise to unlock those underlying forces, which will surface sooner or later. And if we don't move in tandem, we will have too much rise with too yawning gap, and that will create the social disruption we don't want. Thank you.
I'm going to intervene. I want to take questions from the floor. But before I put the question, I just want to put it in context. On China, we need to have a little balance here when we look at it. For 2 or 3 years, the world wanted China to slow down. Everybody thought it was growing at too fast a pace and it's unsustainable. And when they're doing exactly that, when they're trying to calibrate that, when they're trying to take more market-driven steps, now we start blaming China for slowing down and creating issues. So I think there is, the right answer is somewhere in between. I saw Neelam put her hand up, so I'm going to start with her question first. Can someone get her a mic, please?
Thank you.
Announce your stance. Are you for or against? Kidding.
Both. As a former diplomat, I feel entitled to be both pessimistic and also politically incorrect. So I want to pose the question on the integration aspect of the discussion this morning. So one is, of course, that integration for whom? Is the individual, the person, people at the heart of this enterprise? Because what we have had in the past and what we have now is a free movement of capital globally, trade, maybe regional blocks and mega trade agreements now, but not of people. Nobody wants people to be able to cross borders. So what are the objectives? What is the aim of this process? And I raise this at least partly because if you look at the European Union, which has been the most successful regional grouping, what you had when you had the Euro crisis was that Greece demanding war reparations from Germany and caricaturing the chancellor with Hitler mustaches. So I'm not sure that, what are we aiming for in terms of Asian integration? We have the same kinds of tensions in Asia as other parts of the world, whether it is Europe, whether it is, look at the difficulties that ASEAN, which again is one of the successful blocs, facing just over the South China Sea disputes. It's falling apart.
Before I get the panel to respond, any other quick questions, comments?
We'll take one question that has been asked in advance here, if that's okay. And it's going on to this issue of how to bring the bottom tier further into the frame. So what kind of support is there for business model innovations, issues like social enterprise or mobile services that would aim to really drive a bit more activity to that bottom tier, if you will, or those who have yet to be fully brought into the innovation potential? Okay.
Yep, you had to. Okay. I'm going to start again with Mohandas Pai. Shampoo in a sachet seems to be the message coming from that question, that there is room for innovation, but there is a large section of the population which is not as well-to-do, therefore bottom of the pyramid. Can business, technology, entrepreneurship drive that shampoo in a sachet innovation to deliver products and services to the segment? And then we will come to Neelam's question.
With you, I'm being mistaken as if I'm a Trump and a Bernie or something. It is not the case. I'm talking about reality. I'm just saying, let's be real. There is great innovation, great change. Things are going to go ahead. More and more people are going to be empowered. If the size of the cake expands, more people get opportunities. You need to empower them, give them opportunities. More people are going to get educated. Health is going to get better. Just look back 10 years and now, you see a change. Are things going to disappear? They're not going to disappear. All right? So, look, I'll give you the Indian example. If you want to be in power in India politically, you have to take care of the bottom of the pyramid because they're the ones who vote you to power. That's not going to go away. If you're going to focus on one section of population, you're not going to last in politics. So that interaction between the real world, real politics, and innovation is always going to be there. All right? And in a democracy where everybody has a vote, everybody is important. Now in India, we're seeing the use of technology to deliver money, to deliver DBT to a large mass of people. We're seeing debates in the world about basic income. It's a very interesting concept. Basic income implies that every individual gets a little bit of money. Now, if you define poverty as a lack of purchasing power, we can deliver purchasing power directly to people at the bottom of the pyramid to the extent of subsidies, empowering them to take economic decisions. Now, that's the innovation that can come through technology. And when that comes, buying power comes to the bottom. The market will react. There'll be innovative product like the sachets and everything else. Now, look at the smartphone. It costs 40,000 rupees 5 years back. It's costing 5,000 rupees. It'll be 2,500 rupees the next 2 years. Now, with the smartphone, you get connected to the market economy. Now, look at e-commerce. 200 million artisans in this country who are self-employed are not connected to markets. Now, through e-commerce, they can get connected to markets and get better money. Today, there is hope. 10 years back, there was no hope. There is exploitation. Now that can go away because there'll be information dissemination. There'll be direct contract. Now these are massive forces which are going to change. I've only said don't expect everything to change. It never happens. Change happens at the top. Change happens sometime in the bottom, sometime in the middle at differential rates. Society is going to be in a churn. It's not going to be nirvana in 15 years. It's not going to happen. But we're going to be better off in 15 years by innovation, by technology, by opening up, by integration, by intra-trade, to reduce waste, to reduce inefficiency, increase productivity, and have better jobs all over by integration. And if you look at the other side, without integration, where will you be? We'll be worse off.
Curtis, I want to take Neelam's question. I mean, Ralph Nader said that if strangers behave like neighbors, humanity would be invigorated. We have in Asia neighbors behaving like strangers at times. There will always be this contrasting scenarios between countries that could potentially create conflicts, the kind she was referring to as Greece versus Germany, and we do have simmerings of that in Asia. How do you watch out for that? Or is this flying below the radar of any kind of formal political union and staying put with Mohandas's point about a common market opportunity? Is that the way out?
I'm going to answer a little bit differently, maybe more directly to a point Neelam raised about ASEAN, this Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Clearly, such great progress. Who could have envisioned ASEAN? In some ways, I don't know if you remember, way back when there was a Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, which really didn't succeed, and now we have an ASEAN grouping. So while I'm a big fan of multilateral organizations, I'm also a realist. And that's where I think change and increment and integration will be incremental, and it will have to be incremental. You know, we joke in ASEAN that the ASEAN way is, okay, every country does their own thing. That's the ASEAN way. And so one very realistic take on thing whenever I look at geopolitics is follow the money. And so when I think about why is ASEAN split, very clearly money is playing a key factor. China versus certain ASEAN countries, my home for many years, the Philippines, clearly tensions will continue there. China going around the world to recruit allies. I don't know what Ghana knows about the Southeast Asian situation, but they're supporting China, it seems. Follow the money. Another key point I don't know, maybe you raised, when I think about addressing the bottom of the pyramid and the sachets, clearly we need to think through how to get that bottom of the pyramid, or a little bit above the bottom of the pyramid, access to capital. Because to be honest, people know their markets best and know what people need, not some World Bank banker in Washington or an ADB banker in Manila who's hired a consultant who worked in a country, who knows, millions of miles, no, I can't say hundreds of miles away, but he just said, okay, now I'm your consultant because I know you. This doesn't really reflect the reality of on the ground. And so when I think about what we can do, we all need to get out in the field. You know, in my ADB role, you know, I'm in Bihar, I'm in Chhattisgarh, really some of the poorest places, looking at what ADB is doing. Sometimes great, sometimes, you know, maybe it could be a little bit better. And I'm always struck by so-called livelihood programs. So these are programs that nonprofits, multilaterals have helped really people, let's say at the bottom of the pyramid, try and make something and then sell it. I'm always struck by the programs many times don't have any business sense. They produce tons of things from, I don't know, old newspapers, but no one buys it except us, the foreigners, visiting the projects. So I think we really need to integrate into our outreach a sense of business skills, marketing and all, and we cannot rely on the elites to shape things without understanding what's happening on the ground.
We're moving away from Asian integration into haves versus have-nots and top and bottom of the pyramid. Ambassador Bhatia.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pai's optimism is infectious. And I told him last night he talks like Alvin Toffler. He sees the future, and the way he sees it, he tells us.
And gives
The
us a
problem
shot.
with some of us who come from Delhi to Mumbai is this. There's a huge disconnect between the way we look at the world in Delhi and the way we look at the world in Mumbai. And it is that disconnect which is reflected in the title here, Geopolitics and Business. If we really are aiming to move into the direction that Mr. Pai is hinting and others are a little bit cautious, we have to see how business can be shaped by geopolitics and how geopolitics can be shaped by business. Therefore, I would submit that we need to look at that holistic, that balanced approach. Because frankly, the trouble is with the word Asian integration equal to Asian common market. If people in Mumbai think that in 5 or 10 or 20 years, there's going to be Asian Union that would stretch from Turkey to Japan, clearly that is neither what they mean nor what's going to happen. The central issue here is that change is happening. And I think as Foreign Secretary Jaishankar said yesterday, India is ready for it. India is trying to actually not merely not obstruct the change, but accelerate it, facilitate it in a manner in which not just the interests of India, but of the world, definitely of Asia, would be protected. So I would request moderator to look for that middle space where truly geopolitics meets business. Thank you.
Yeah, if there is another quick question, I'll take that.
I just want to
Yeah,
respond
sure.
to it. Look, let me give you an example. Middle East oil, $100 a barrel. Fracking as a technology. Oil collapses to 45, now is 50. Going forward, 60% of world oil is consumed by automobiles. You have an electric car coming. Heavy pollution in China, pollution all over the world. The electric car could be a solution. Solar energy on a panel with storage and the electric car. People say by 2030, 80% of cars are going to be electric cars. Now, what is driving this change? Is it geopolitics or is it technology and innovation? Innovation is the biggest element that drives change, including geopolitics. The rise of the railway over the last 200 years, the rise of the steam engine, the rise of the steamboat, all these drove change. And it is not driven by geopolitics is a part of it, but I firmly believe in this century right now, technology and innovation is going to drive geopolitics and change because the established order is based upon a set of attributes, and those attributes are being questioned, are being changed. Robotics. I mean, look at drone technology and what is happening in some parts of the world and how that is going to change geopolitics. And this is amazing, isn't it? Now, we must get used to that. Maybe our thinking is 15 years behind and not cutting edge. So if you look forward and the pace of change accelerates, geopolitics is going to be certainly impacted.
To come back, I mean, there have been different approaches from different countries about trade. I mean, for a lot of the Western bloc, trade follows the flag. But you have this country, India, grown out of enterprise, pehle danda fir janda. So I don't think there is a set model that politics will determine. Geopolitics is a factor to consider. Business will find its way. Innovation and technology will drive. And innovation in the United States actually helped bring in some change in the Middle East by ease of communication. So innovation will find its way to people irrespective of what there is. I agree with Ambassador Bhatia, this is not a change that is a 5-year business plan or a 10-year business plan. The change could take a very long time. But the journey will be as exciting, if not more, because of the kind of opportunities it can throw up in different parts of the world. Asia, if it's 60% of the world, with a third or more than third of the GDP and almost 40% of the purchasing power parity GDP, then we have a great market opportunity that folks should grab and take it. In the process, worry about like in linear programming, it's important to know what is the objective function and what is a constraint function. If we confuse the two, we will be chasing the wrong thing. I think we've had interesting issues raised. There is an opportunity. The bell wants me to stop, so I'm going to stop here, and if there are any last comments, questions from the floor, we will take that quickly.
There's one question.
Could you turn on that mic, please? Here's a question.
There's a question from Huang to the chair. What are the features of an innovative society? What are the features of an innovative society?
I'm going to.
Features of Innovating Society that is much more of an open society, not the George Soros openness, in the sense that is acceptable to change. It has got a very young population, right? And people are hungry for change, and the mindset is open. I mean, I agree with him totally that it's all a function of the mindset, right? And when you have aspiration, rising aspiration, you know, it spreads tremendously. And to me, the cell phone, just a cell phone. Look at the cell phone assimilation all over Asia. Look at how things have changed. Everybody communicates on a cell phone. There is commerce on a cell phone. Everything is happening on a cell phone. And business models are changing. Life is changing. And today, Prime Minister Modi can speak to 1 billion people on a cell phone. Look at the impact on democracy. Look at the communication. Money can come to your bank account without any charges by UPI. And that's changed financial services. The India stack, which has been developed in India, can change financial services for 6 billion people at a very low cost. And look at the change. If it happens in 5 years, we'll see the change. So I think you need openness, a younger population, rising aspiration, and hunger because you're exposed to the world.
I think we'll come to a close with that. As a think tank, we need to move to do tank, because as the old saying of look east has been substituted with act east. So let's look for opportunities, be conscious about the constraint functions in linear programming. Yes, sir.
Actually, I think in our zeal, we get a little drifted away from the main topic, which one of the person here mentioned. Innovation integration. I'll just cap with two things. I think for Asians, the two very quick solutions are social innovation, frugal innovation. We are resource constrained area. In social innovation, in the very beginning, you mentioned about Grameen Bank microcredit. And also, if you look at Indians, they have been one of the best quick fixers of problems. So we need to empower, finance those intermediary innovators who are catering to many market-driven commercial innovations. So those are two areas I would say is to take forward. And as far as Asia is concerned, it would be good down the road, like Asian Center for Innovation Integration, which would sort of be a point where, I'll give you a simple example. GE's portable ECG machine, which used to cost $10,000, when it was made for rural India, it came down to $1,000. Then you had ultrasound device, same by the GE. In China, it got to $10,000, which is originally $30,000. So these are the things we need to tap into, and it would be good down the road. It would be much easier to have a center for excellence, innovation, integration, than to achieve an Asian common market, which will be much more challenging. So that would be my parting thoughts. Thank you.
Curtis?
At the end of the day, I'm an optimist. Things are going to be better. But I do think we always have to recognize there are not always such great things that come with integration. And I think the message I always give to business and to government is that we need to move to greater cooperation and integration. But if we are going to get the support to ensure that it happens, we have to address some of the not so wonderful consequences of it. Technology is amazing, but I need a job to buy that technology.
Terrific. It's almost like, hey, Mr. Geopolitics, Asian integration can happen. Business and technology will drive towards it, with you, without you, in spite of you. With that, we will close this session. Thank you so much for your engagement.
With, with that, it's a wrap on our opening dialogue, Innovating for Asian Integration. Thank you to the panelists.